All right, welcome back to Blue Group Radio. This is your host, Eric, and I'm joined with a very special guest. I have Johanna Wender from Bravura Counseling.
Hi,
Jo-
Eric.
Thanks for joining us today. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. Um, so before anyone shuts it down because they heard counseling, that's exactly the problem, right? There's stigmas. I think we're doing way better in the space. I think we're doing way better as just a culture, like Western society, embracing this recognition that we can do a lot and should do a lot to promote mental wellness and how in tune it is and how big of a pillar it is with all health and wellness. But yeah, you are here to talk on all those things and to talk on those lessons specifically for first responders that might just impact a little harder than your average person. So, Johanna, can you start off and give us a little introduction of yourself and what you do?
Sure. Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm married to a retired police sergeant. He served 20 years doing local police work. I'm a mom of two little girls, and I'm also a mental health counselor. So I have my own practice, Bravura Counseling, where I work with individuals and agencies. And in my practice, I only work with first responders, so police, fire, EMS, some healthcare workers, and then military, active duty, and veterans. Before I started my practice, I worked for a decade in community mental health. And the last 5 years of that were at one of the biggest sexual assault centers in the country. Um, I specialize in treating post traumatic stress. And I love being able to help people who have post traumatic stress reactions, mostly because it's so treatable. And I love seeing people feel better and getting them back out and living their lives fully.
Yeah, well, thank you for hitting on all those things. The crash course, first off, thank you for your service. I think that there's a lot of forgotten people or under either appreciated or at least not as notably commented on in the first responder space. And I think spouses and families really top that list. There's a lot that cops, firefighters, dispatchers bring home, and they bring it home to someone, whether it's the direct stories or whether it's the direct impact on how that affects that person. So thank you for that and doing what you do.
Yeah, thank you.
Um, yeah. So one thing I want to rewind back a little bit. You enjoy working with post traumatic stress, and the reason why you said was because it's so treatable. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. As people, we are wired for resiliency. We are exposed to traumatic events throughout our lives. And most of the time, they do not cause traumatic reactions. And if you think about it, if you think about your average law enforcement officer, the number of potentially traumatic events they are exposed to, even within a week, you think about car crashes, physical assaults, sexual violence, whether it's happening to them or whether they're responding to it having happened to somebody else. They're exposed to trauma all the time, and it is actually the exception, not the rule, when people develop post traumatic stress disorder or post traumatic stress injury, as we're starting to call it now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but one of the things about it is that, yes, it's so treatable. We have treatment models that have a lot of evidence behind them that work and that work relatively quickly. So the great thing is when somebody comes into my office and they're having a post-traumatic stress reaction, it's often a matter of months, not years and years, until that person is feeling better, until the reaction has subsided and they're able to feel like their old self again. Now, there are some exceptions to that. Sometimes when we see people who have gone an entire career and they've never focused on their mental health, and then they're saying,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I'm 30, 35 years in, and I've had all these traumatic things happen, and I've never talked about it. And
Yep.
they have what we call complex trauma, where it's just so many different traumatic events stacked upon one another. Then it can sometimes take a little bit longer because we have to figure out what the target is and how to get that person feeling whole again. But often it's relatively quickly that people can feel better And that's really what I love about treating it is I love seeing results. I love seeing people reach the goals that they come in for, and a lot of people don't realize that about therapy for post traumatic stress is that it can work so well.
Yeah. Well, that's really encouraging. And I think that even as someone like myself that tries to learn as much as they can for the industry and in the industry, and I'm an avid supporter of therapy and mental health programs, whether it's peer support or whether it's more formalized, it is nice to hear that. I think very inspirational and positive note that it's very treatable and it's very reactive and you can see results quickly. Um, I believe that's one of the biggest hangups. Once someone gets over the potential stigma, is to feel like their problems are so huge or the process will be so daunting. And for some, they don't like the idea that they have to or will may need to talk to someone for the foreseeable future. And just to hear that it's not necessarily that way and everyone's unique is, I think, very helpful for people to recognize.
And I think a lot of people would come in much sooner if they realized that it wasn't that lengthy of a process, if they realized this isn't a lifetime commitment of coming to therapy.
Yeah, and just to throw it out for those that didn't listen to my one of my prior episodes on therapy in general, was that I did start talking to a therapist a number of years ago, and then I stopped. Right, like it was after my buddy Diego was killed at work, and I needed that, and I was very it was very helpful for me to talk to someone routinely, right? So it was at first it was once a week, and then it toggled down to once a month, and then as we went, I just felt really good. I felt like I was thriving again. I didn't feel like I was burdened with all these feelings and thoughts creeping into my day to day, and we kind of talked through it, and then decided that I was just going to maybe schedule it as needed, right? And so the thought being maybe quarterly, maybe half yearly, but I actually went a couple years and I felt just pretty good until life got really crazy and I was a new dad and some other things at work, and I was just like, okay, I'm gonna dial up my doc again. And so I think that that's potentially helpful for people to think is that and realize is that it doesn't have to be this huge obligation and just to give it a shot.
And I love that. I actually have a lot of people who I meet with in just that way, where they might come in and we'll meet once a week for a little while, work toward resolving whatever the issue is that they came in for. And then, yeah, we'll start to titrate back a little bit because they're feeling good. They come to sessions and they start to say things like, I'm not really sure what to talk about today. It's been a pretty good couple of weeks. And so that tells us that we can to toggle it back and that they're doing fine without me, and then they'll stop coming when we've decided that they've reached a point where they don't need this anymore. But then maybe I'll hear back 6 months, a year, a couple years down the road, and they'll want to come back again. Maybe something else happened that was stressful, or maybe they're just realizing, hey, I need to check in again. It's been a little while. And one of the really cool things that I'm starting to see is new firefighters, new police officers who just got out of academy, and they're reaching out to me because they were told in academy that you need to start being proactive about your mental health and
Yeah.
find a counselor and get on a first name basis with them and just have them on standby. Maybe you don't need them now, but you might down the road, and you don't want to be in a crisis situation. And while you're in that crisis, having to find a therapist who is a good fit for you. So do
Yeah.
that now while you're healthy. And I'm so happy to see that so many people are doing that now.
Yeah, I love that. That's super motivating and encouraging for me too, because when I talk with some of my best friends and peers and colleagues about culture change, man, it's a worthy battle, and it's a worthy endeavor to try to change those in the profession and encourage those. And for sure, your efforts will move the needle a little bit at a time, but truly the way to change culture is to indoctrinate and encourage those coming in, right? So you start them off on the right foot. That's awesome to hear that you have that personal experience where it is happening, right? I know that I'm saying things like that. I know that a lot of those I look up to and laterally to in the first responder world as leaders, that they are saying that. So it's great to hear that it's actually coming into fruition. Because you're absolutely right. Like, it's not easy to open up for a lot of people, and it's not easy to open up. I mean, man, we're gonna stack it up to a stranger, right? So in my time of critical need when I've never felt more beside myself, then I'm gonna, go online and find someone that uses my insurance, and then just kind of cold call and just see how it feels. So no, I think that's really responsible and proactive to do that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I would say if somebody is looking for a therapist and they don't really know where to start, one of the best places to start is asking your police family,
Hmm.
whoever you're comfortable talking with, who are they seeing, who do they know about, talking to chaplains. A lot of agencies now are putting together referral lists of vetted providers, which is great because while there are a lot of great therapists out there, not every therapist necessarily understands police culture, first responder life, and they're not the best equipped to work with somebody who does this kind of work. There are apps now like Cortico. Some of them have referral lists in them. A lot of agencies that have peer support will know of local therapists who are well equipped to serve their communities. Um, and the other cool thing is if you're willing to do telehealth, you don't necessarily have to find somebody local. As
Hmm.
long as they are licensed within the state where you live, you can meet with them. So that was one of the really cool things, that the positive effects of COVID is that we saw things becoming much more interconnected. And I was able to meet with people in Eastern Washington when I was based in Western Washington.
Hmm.
So that's another thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, no, that's great. And for those in my region, I'm in Washington State. We have Code 4 Northwest, and so that is a program or an organization that builds lists of vetted, emergency counselors and first responder, uh, emergency response trained people, right? That can speak to that culture. Um, but for sure, it's good to, I mean, just like anything else, like just get referrals and talk to people that I luckily, I think we're at a generation where more people are pretty candid and love to share their experience, or at least put out that they talk to someone. So I know that's true for my agency. I can think of a couple more senior officers or recently retired officers that they're pretty comfortable just casually saying like, hey, I go to a therapist. If you want her info, I'll share it gladly, right? Because that's um, that personal vetting that is just so much more easy to trust.
Yes. Yeah. And there's no better, I think, no better advertisement for therapy than when a trusted leader is willing to say that, is willing
Yeah.
to say, hey, I go to therapy. This is who I see. This is why I go to therapy. This is how it's helped me. That is so much more impactful than anything I could ever say to you right now.
Yeah, and I love that you talked about fit, right? Just like, I mean, I can think about going to buy a used car, like my first newer used car, um, when I was on probation as an officer, and I'd driven an old truck, and I really needed to get something a little bit more reliable, right? And I'll also self plug that I was pretty responsible buying a newer used car on probation rather than what I see some young men and women doing with their with their new salaries. But no, it was one of those things where I remember going to the dealership, and the first person that walked up, like instantly I had that like kind of skeezy like salesperson thing, and I just wasn't gelling with them. And I think that we have that gut reaction sometimes, and some people we're just not really jiving with. And so I would highly encourage, and maybe Johanna, you have some input as to how someone might go about this, but having a conversation. When I found a new practitioner, I was on psychologytoday.com, and I sent out a couple messages based on their profiles and what they put out that they're about and their style. And I talked with one, and I felt pretty good, and I was like, all right, let's do this. Let's have the conversation, and let's go. So, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think Psychology Today can be a great place to start. A lot of therapists have a profile on there. It's something that we have to pay for, so not everybody is on
Mm,
there. But that could be a good place to look for people and just read how they write about what they do. Does that speak to you? Does that feel like it would be a good fit? Again, asking around, getting some names of from trusted people, And I would then contact those therapists that you've narrowed down and ask if they're willing to do a phone consult with you. Most of us are willing to do like a free 15-minute or so consult over the phone for you to ask us questions. And that will give you a pretty good read on whether you think that we would be a good fit for you. Um, I will say that it's okay and actually encouraged to try out multiple therapists until you find the person who you feel like is a right fit. And no therapist can possibly be the right fit for everybody. And therapists should not take that personally. I certainly do not take it personally if I am not the
Yeah.
right fit for you. And the other thing I will say is maybe be flexible on some of what you feel like are your requirements. I had somebody tell me once that they were looking for a male therapist and they really
Hmm.
wanted a male therapist. And they decided to reach out to me and they felt like it was a good fit and that they were so glad that they gave me a chance, even though I am not a man. So sometimes what you think is a requirement may not actually be a requirement, and just to be open with that too.
Yeah. So some of that, as you outlined, could be based on the person or how we read the person. Do you have any anecdote as far as like personality working better with different people, or even modality? If we're gonna go
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. So, what I have found with a lot of us who specialize in first responders is a lot of us tend to have kind of a similar personality type. So, for speaking about myself, I'm very direct, I'm very to the point. I can sometimes use some foul language. I won't beat things around the bush. I won't give you that therapist saccharine
Hmm.
speech. I will tell you like it is. And I've noticed that a lot of us who work with first responders tend to be that way. And that seems to be a very natural fit, right? No officer wants to walk in and have some, I don't know, sweetie talking therapist who isn't actually telling them what is
What?
happening.
No, you don't think so?
I do not. um,
You say
I think
directly, I do not. Yeah.
exactly. um, the other things, yes, modalities. If you are looking to, if you're looking for to address a particular issue with your therapist, make
Hmm.
sure that's something that your therapist outlines that they treat. A great example, obsessive compulsive disorder is an area of specialty. Most therapists are not trained to treat OCD, and if that's why you are seeking out a therapist, you need to make sure that that person is trained in a model that and can tell you how they treat OCD. I would also say that post traumatic stress is an area of specialty. Unfortunately, a lot of therapists will say they treat trauma when they are not, in fact, specially trained to treat
Mm.
trauma. It's infuriating and it's something that we don't see in the medical field, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't go to a person who says that they specialize in cardiology who didn't actually have any training in it. So it really upsets me. But um, the three gold standard treatment models for post traumatic stress are prolonged exposure or PE, cognitive processing therapy or CPT, not to be confused with cognitive behavioral therapy, which is CBT,
Mm.
and then EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So there are some other models for trauma that work well too, but those three have the most evidence behind them. And if you go to somebody trained in at least one of those three, you will likely be in good hands.
Okay. Awesome. So trauma. So there's some snake oil salespeople with the trauma, huh? And like, how do we sniff them out? Because that's not something I'd
Oh,
be familiar with. Like I think in some ways I hear other practitioners, which I think is correct, right? And everyone has trauma, but maybe not to the same degree, and maybe not that specialized training you're talking about.
yeah, it's upsetting to me. I think it's an area that some practitioners don't even realize they have to specialize in. They think
Mm.
I studied it in graduate school, that should be good enough, and it really does require um, additional training. One of the reasons for that is because a lot of what we're doing in trauma focused treatment is that we are having you confront the traumatic memory or memories. So
Mm.
having you confront it in some way, talking about it, writing about it, thinking about it. And it is completely the opposite of what feels like what you want to do. You want to comfort somebody. You don't want
Mm,
them to suffer. You don't want them to have to replay it or think about it. So it goes against our nature of making somebody feel uncomfortable, but it is for a purpose, and it's to
yeah.
help the person, to work through that memory. Yeah. So how do we sniff it out? Again, can they tell you how they were trained in trauma? They should be able to
Okay.
tell you what model they use. Um, and one one thing I sometimes don't like to see is when people say, "Oh, I use a blend of models to treat this or that." And when you say you're using a blend to treat trauma, what you're really saying is you're not really using anything to fidelity, and
Oh, okay.
that that could be okay, but that could also be really bad. So I would just make sure that they're trained in an evidence-based practice. You can look up evidence-based practices. I also just named the three with the most research behind them,
Mm-hmm.
and they should be able to say how they were trained in at least one of those.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. And then if all else, just listen to your gut. And if it's just not feeling right, like just try someone else, right? Like what does it take? It's not that difficult. It almost sounds like it kind of reminds me of, a lot of doctors have very limited nutritional, I guess formalized nutritional training, right? Whereas like if you're going to talk about like diet and how it interacts with your body and your individual chemistry, then yeah, like a dietitian is going to be what you need, not just your family doc.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, so there are a lot of therapists who we would say are generalists, where maybe they can work with mild depression or anxiety, stress, those kinds of things. But
Mm-hmm.
there are a lot of issues that really do require specialization, and uh, just like we do in the medical field, we should do the same in mental health. Make sure you're seeing somebody who has specialized training in the area where you need help.
Yeah. Well, I love that. I made a note here, and you were talking about building resiliency, and this pops up for me because it's a huge word. And I remember actually having conversations with a group of officers where we were debating whether we felt resiliency was something that you just had in you, or whether you could build it. Um, I'm of the camp that you can build it because I think, when I think about myself, I would not classify myself as a very resilient young man. I was not a resilient child. I was not one to reflect quickly and then lean into challenge and grow from that. And that's something that I try to do now. But what are your thoughts on that? And maybe is there something that you've seen from your work that you reflect on?
Yeah, I would agree that it's something that can be learned and can be practiced. So I would think of it as a practice. I see people doing things like taking cold showers every morning to work on building their resiliency. Using sports or other hobbies to build your resiliency. But um, I would say too that one of the best things you can do is that frequent exposure to something difficult while giving yourself the chance to recover.
Mm,
So, if we use the example of police work, you are frequently exposed to things that are scary, upsetting, disturbing, you name it. I was saying earlier just about all the traumatic events you might see in a given week that the average person might not see in years.
hmm
uh, I have this checklist that I'll give my new clients when I see them. It's called a life events checklist, and it has about 16 items that are potentially traumatic. And I once had a blank one sitting on my desk, and my husband saw it and joked, "Oh, I could check all these off as having happened at work."
Yeah.
And that's not something that the average person can say. Most people
hmm
do not go to work and get traumatized. Um, but what you can do is when you're exposed to these, either whether they're big or little events, um, focusing on recovering from them, making sure that you're getting proper sleep, making sure that you're not drinking as a way to cope with it, making sure you're talking about it with somebody, and what your reaction is, even if you don't have a huge reaction. So whether that's your spouse or significant other, peer support, a buddy at work, somebody outside of work, but just making sure you have people with whom you can talk about your reactions and that you're taking care of yourself along the way. And I think that by doing that, you are building your ability to handle even tougher situations down the road.
Yeah, for sure. You're talking about time to recover, and I know you're an ultra runner, So you are tackling, tens and tens of miles. You just did a race recently. You're telling me about that. So it's not something that you can just jump into, right? You can't just go run 20, 40 miles um, and not expect to have done some crazy damage, right?
Right. Well, yes, you would do some crazy damage. And I just ran 50 miles, and I'm sure I did a little bit of damage even then.
Yeah.
But yes, my journey toward that was signing up for starting with shorter training runs and
Hmm.
signing up for shorter races and gradually building those as my body and my mind became more capable of handling it.
Yeah. Well, I'm super impressed. Those that know me or follow me for a little while, you probably know that I'm not a big runner. Um, I like to do my quick sprints and my little jog, to warm up or whatever. But hats off to you and those that do ultra endurance and all that. But I do think it says something about your character, when you look at anyone and whatever their trade is, whatever their profession is, but they have something that they really challenge themselves. So I guess this is my way of saying I really I'm trying to be very complimentary of your character as you demonstrate, and I think that that's worth looking at is when you build a relationship with someone and you look at a practitioner, and if they do and that they are able to share a little bit about them, that's what helps us open up, right? We're learning about the person, and so I think that's super cool. um, but on that note, I think oftentimes I'm in this habit of asking people about their story or what brought them here. Officially, I ask it all the time with people coming into law enforcement. I want to know where their head's at, but truly, I want to know whether they've thought about things and like what brings them here to this venture to help people in this way. Um, and a lot of people say, they want to help people. They want to be a cop because they want to help people. But really, there's a lot of ways to help people. And I think that your profession is extremely valuable, invaluable, and noble. But um, if you're willing, what would you say is your origin story, and what brings you here to this profession that you found?
Yeah, so kind of like what you were saying, I always wanted to do something that felt like I was giving back, that I was serving my community in some way. I've always just gravitated towards psychology, and I love being able to read people and to learn about how the mind works and what goes on and what makes somebody make decisions that way. And so I was always fascinated in that way. So something I don't talk about too often, but I actually had PTSD myself when I was younger and went through therapy myself. Was able to completely heal it, and that experience was profound and really taught me that it reinforced what I wanted to do, to be a therapist. And it really made me want to pay it forward and work with people who'd been through trauma. So that's kind of my origin story and how I ended up working in trauma.
Yeah,
And yeah, it's so meaningful to me, and I'm so happy that I chose this path.
yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that and opening up. And as we talked about, you're married to a retired law enforcement officer. Um, so I'm curious what takeaways you have either from your personal experience or from working with um, your clients and your patients, as far as things for families to think about or significant others to think about.
Yeah, we were talking earlier about checking in with your spouse, and finding out what are they comfortable hearing, what are they
Hmm.
not comfortable hearing. And one thing I see a lot with clients is that they think that their spouses are capable of much less than I believe they are.
Hmm.
I really believe that most spouses are able to hear a lot of the details of what the job is, and they'll be okay with it. One of the reasons for that is because there are several degrees of separation. Um, just like when an officer comes in to my office and is telling me a horrible story, I wasn't at the scene. I'm not seeing what they were seeing. I don't smell it. I don't hear it. All that sensory information that often becomes encoded as trauma, that's not, I'm not getting any of that. And so I'm, again, several layers of separation from it. And it's not traumatizing me to hear it in the way that it might have been for them to be there.
Hmm.
So I'm a big proponent of talking to your spouse as long as they say they're okay hearing it. I think another thing to understand. So I remember when our first daughter was born. And she was a newborn, and my husband was holding her, and he started having these memories from years ago coming back of
Mm-hmm.
Sid's call.
Yeah.
And he was telling me, he said, I hadn't thought about it in years, but and it bothered me at the time, but I thought I was okay. And then it all came back when he was holding our baby. And so just knowing that somebody can go through something and maybe they'll be okay, but it might come back later. And that having trauma reminders doesn't necessarily mean that you have post traumatic stress disorder or PTSI. It just, it's natural that it might bring back something that's a reminder, might bring back a memory. That was a profound experience for him to have held a dead baby. And so, of course, that would come back at that time. I think also just knowing some of the little quirks and things with law enforcement officers that we need to get used to, right? So when we go out to a restaurant, who's going to sit facing the door? It's never going to be me.
Mm-hmm.
um,
Yeah.
Understanding that sometimes officers will catastrophize a little bit, so they'll often think about the worst case scenario and they'll play it out in their head and how they're
Yep.
going to respond. So whenever I go somewhere, my husband kind of wants to know like what road am I going on, and can I let him know that I got there safely? Not because he's worried about my ability to handle it, but just because he's seen so many situations where the day did not go as people were expecting.
Yeah.
Um, and we can say that maybe that's unhealthy to constantly think about the worst case scenario, and to some degree, maybe it is. But we also have to understand as spouses that this is what keeps officers safe.
Mm-hmm.
They're constantly thinking through all the iterations of what they might come upon when they go to a call, and that their ability to think about the worst case scenario is keeping them and the community safe. Um, so it's something that often carries over into personal life.
Yeah.
And being understanding of that while also helping to give reassurance is something I have come across again and again in my marriage.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. I mean, those examples are powerful, and I think that they connect with anyone in this industry. Sitting with your back to the door is a big tactical no-no, and some people might think if you're not a cop, or you're listening in and just to try to get a peek or conceptualize. I know there's a lot of listeners that are prospective police, but yeah, it's not really the paranoia, right? But it's literally being aware, vigilant, because if you are in uniform, you can be a target, and we saw that really close to home a number of years ago in Lakewood, and then Tim Breton in Seattle. That was when I was like freshly out of academy, right? So we're having the conversation of like, do we stop going to coffee in the morning with 3 or 4 officers, or do we sit a certain way? And there was literally someone has to have their back to the door, but I remember how we debriefed trainings. We looked at floor plans of where the officers were, and rest in peace. And there's these little lessons where many of us were like, well, we're not going to stop how we live, and we're not going to stop how we work, and we're not going to stop this where we can meet and commune and then interact with the community in generally a very positive way in a coffee shop. Um, but it was to move the chairs so that no one's like truly faced back, and it's to look up and make eye contact with people, as anyone in retail would say. That's like generally a big deterrent in something happening, right? Someone stealing something, but make eye contact, you smile, and you're just a little bit more aware. And then you also sit on the corner of your chair, right? You don't lean back on the thing. You sit in a position where you're a little bit more forward, so you can stand up, you can move. Um, yeah, and I think that the key is recognizing that there is something you can do. There's a skill that you can build, and awareness you can build, as long as you don't let it be paralyzing, as long as it's not debilitating. Sometimes in my time off, my wife does the same thing, right? She'll start to sit, and she likes sitting against the wall because it just feels natural. But she'll usually stop and say, "Where do you want to sit?" And as a matter of practice, and maybe you're going to be proud of me, but to try to get myself out of that habit, a lot of times I do say, yeah, sit again, yeah, face the door. I'm going to sit with my back to the wall. I'm going to be present, and I'm going to recognize like, hey, if there's something that goes down, I will hear and I will be able to turn around, but I'm in plain clothes. People aren't seeing me as a potential target right now. So Some cops listening to this are going to think I'm a giant idiot and I'm irresponsible, but it is what it is. And so
No,
I offer
I'm
that.
proud of you, Eric.
Thank
I
you.
think that's great, and I do think there's a fine line with the catastrophizing and thinking about all the possible scenarios and being tactical and being safe, and
Hmm.
just going too far down that rabbit hole and not even being able to be present and enjoy yourself. And if you find it
Yeah.
going too far that other way, then you probably need to come talk to someone like me, because that is taking away from your quality of life.
Yeah. And like, I'll give another example because it just popped in my mind today, but I was dropping off my daughter at daycare and it's a portable building, right? So I'm walking back through in between the portable and the main building, and I'm walking towards the parking lot. And for whatever random weird reason, I think, where's my closest cover? And I'm not like, those that know me, I'm not the tactical guru. I'm not, the one carrying like extra magazines and like a, night vision in my time off, and 18 tourniquets. But in that moment, I was like, where would I go if something bad happened? Which wall would I hug against, and how quick would I get there? And quick, just as quickly as I thought that, I was like, okay, I know now. I know I'll go that way. What a ridiculous thought. And then I went back to just living. So I think, just giving grace and recognizing, hey, like, this job can change you. Don't beat yourself up over it. You're going to have these random thoughts because you're right, Johanna. Like, these skills and these habits are ingrained, and we keep building on them the longer we're in it, and or the more experiences where we had to use it. And it's validating because it kept us safe, it kept us alive. Um, but it's just going to change you, and it's okay. It's not good or bad. It just is, as long as it's not interfering with how you're living in your life.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, I do like, just talk the conversation about talking with your significant other, and you won't really know where that balance is unless you talk about it, right? So you can pre-talk about it, right? You can pre-game it a little bit, where you're like, hey, I'm gonna be exposed to all this traumatic stuff. Where's your barometer? Where is the barometer? Like, what do you want to hear? Do you want to hear like what call, the type of call that's bothering me? Do you want to hear the gory little details? And I've heard a lot of significant others, across the board, where some are like, hey, just talk to me and I don't care. Some are like, yeah, please tell me everything. One thing I'll offer from my perspective is that sometimes when they say, please tell me everything, that might not be the best, because although we're not there, a lot of times when we hear about something, we can imagine quite a gruesome scene, um, from things we've experienced or movies we've seen, all that. Um, I remember talking to my wife, and it was just such on my mind. I'd been a cop for a while. I was already a sergeant, um, but it was this car versus motorcycle, and the I thought that the story was just so gnarly that I just wanted. It was just on the top of my mind. I just felt like I needed to share what I had experienced and what I had observed. And my wife's not the one that is curious about anything. She doesn't care to hear it, but she's extremely supportive, and she'll stand there and listen to anything I have to say. Um, but it was bothering me, and like, so much so I just wanted to say it to someone. Um, and so she was willing, right? I was trying to put it out of mind, but then finally I said, "Hey, so this wreck, the guy was the guy was going so fast, recklessly. He collided with this driver that turned in front of him, and I had to find his head. Like, I had to look for his helmet with his head in it in the bushes, and I found it. And it took her back so much. I just looked at her face, and she was like, "Oh my god!" Like, and I felt bad. And immediately after I said it, I was like, "Okay, that was a little too much."
Mm.
Those are like pretty extreme details that, you talk to a firefighter or a cop, they're like, "Whoa, that's crazy," and then they kind of move on. Um,
Hmm.
it's not a normal person thing, right?
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing I often will hear from officers and firefighters is I'll say, okay, well, what is your spouse comfortable hearing? And they'll say, well, they've said they're okay hearing anything as long as it doesn't have to do with kids or animals. And I
Mm,
think to myself, well, that's great, but a lot of the calls that are most traumatizing to people do involve kids or animals. And so you have to decide and figure out ahead of time, hopefully, who are you going to talk to when
mhm.
you do go to a call like that bothers you. If you can't go to your spouse because they told you, I don't want to hear this, then who can you go to? Have a plan for that as well. Have some battle buddies, have people at work, peer support, other departments. a therapist, chaplain, somebody, at least somebody that you've identified that you can talk to. And um, any therapist who works with first responders needs to be 100% able to hear details of the kinds of calls that you've gone to. And that's part of what helps us to specialize is we can handle hearing it. We can hear the gory details, and you're not going to traumatize us or make us run and hide or dissolve into a puddle of tears. We are trained to be able to handle this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's the key is having someone, right? Some people listening might be like, "Hey, I'm still not sure about this therapy thing." Well, talk to someone, right? And something's better than nothing. Find that person, find that peer support or your clergy or whoever it is, right? Maybe it's your family member, um, someone that you can talk to. It's going to be huge. We talked about, and we covered a lot of topics, and one of my like to do lists was to hit on some tips that especially your new people coming in, that you would encourage. One of them you've already talked about, which is identify a practitioner ahead of time, like before you feel you need it, right? And so I think that's huge. We talked about significant others and talking with your spouse and kind of preempting them. Um, Anything else that's coming to mind for you on that?
Yeah, one thing would be to have some hobbies or things that you identify that help keep you grounded and sane and
Hmm.
that are outside of police work. So don't let your entire identity be consumed by your job. That's so important to start that early. And finding ways to decompress after a difficult day. Exercise is what a lot of officers tell me they do, and that's great. There's a lot of evidence to back that exercise after a stressful day can help you work through it and
Hmm.
process it. It's how I deal with my stress. Is I go run a million miles. Um, and I would say another thing too, which I think I said earlier, which is to start early and start going to therapy before you think you actually need it.
Yeah.
Just like you go to the dentist twice a year, even though you don't think you have anything wrong with your teeth, but you go for preventative maintenance. You
Mm.
go to your family doc or your primary care doc once a year, once every other year to get a checkup. Go talk to a therapist, once a year, twice a year, just to make sure everything's on the up and up. Am I doing okay? What are some things I need to watch out for? I've noticed I'm having nightmares. Is this something I need to worry about? Just go in and talk to someone. And um, it doesn't take a whole lot to do that. And like I said, you'll want to have that person identified before you get to a point where you're in crisis and you need to talk to someone. And some people might even say, "Oh, I picked the person, but I haven't met them yet."
Mm.
Well, meet them before you
Yeah.
have the crisis. Have an actual meeting or two with them ahead of time, so that you know that what you think you see online and what they seem to be is actually what they are. You might think they have a great website and hate them when you
Yeah.
talk to them. So make sure that you've sussed them out before you rely on them in that moment of great need.
Yeah, absolutely. And even for something like this podcast, like it's just so different when I can look at someone's social media and I can say, hey, I like what you're talking about. I like what your brand is, but just to have a conversation and connect. And then for those curious, like um, I know Johanna from quite a while ago. We went to the same high school. So when we were in cross country, and I was doing it to get out of PE, and she was doing it obviously just a good runner and clearly a very accomplished runner at this point. I think that's funny. But Johanna's been working with my department, providing virtual visits, optional. The city department, they pay for them. It's anonymous, so I think it's a step in the right direction to provide another resource. For those that might not otherwise just sign on to talk to a therapist. They can kind of feel it out and just kind of do a little visit. And get a flavor for it. It has me thinking about how a lot of departments have leaned into mandatory regular check-ins or visits, I should say. So, Johanna, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that as departments, whether fire or police or and on, are starting to take that on.
I think it's great. I love that more and more departments are doing this because it's making it normal to talk to a shrink,
Hmm.
and it should be just like
Yeah.
it's normal to go to the doctor, normal to go to the dentist. It should be a normal part of how your self care, taking care of your mental health and your emotional health. Yeah, I would encourage anybody whose department is offering this to check it out. Um, I've even met people through some of these wellness visits who already have a therapist and they just wanted to talk to somebody because, oh, I have a therapist, but they don't specialize in working with first responders. And I have some job related questions about my mental health I thought I would ask you. Um, and you don't have to have an agenda when you go into those meetings. You can just come in and
Hmm.
say, I don't know what this is, but I want to check it out. Can you just ask me some questions and see how I'm doing? I get that a lot from people. I think the mandatory visits are also great because it's a great equalizer. Everybody from the chief to the probie employees are going in and talking to someone, and there's no shame in it if everybody is doing it. So I love that departments are offering that too.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's like what better way to lead by example or lead from the front, saying like, "Hey, everyone's doing it. You can you can talk or you can sit there." And I've heard anecdotes where even people that said that their department's gone to mandatory visits and they were kind of their one. They were the person with their arms crossed. After a visit or so, they just talked and then they just found like it was just very nice to talk to someone. And it's not like they dove into their deepest, darkest like traumas or what was bothering them, but that they just felt seen and they felt heard, and then they were able to start building that trust. Where down the line they were very comfortable opening up, right? Because they're building that relationship, and it's someone that they now know, not just a nameless, faceless concept that they're going to stick it to admin and not talk to this person. So it is really cool to hear those examples from those that were a bit standoffish and apprehensive, and how they've come to open up and recognize how beneficial it's been.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
All right, Johanna. So, um, curious, are there any closing notes or thoughts you have? We've covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah. I would say, in general, if you are on the fence about trying out counseling, therapy, um, try it out. Go to a session or two, see what it's like. If your department offers some kind of wellness sessions, go see that person and talk to them. I am a lot of people's first therapist, and a lot of people are pretty terrified and nervous when they first come talk to me, and that is absolutely expected. And I hope that if you come talk to me or somebody else, that we can make it a comfortable experience for you. Again, like you were saying, nobody is going to get into their deepest, darkest interwebs of their brain in the first meeting. And if I'm doing a wellness session with you in your department, we are definitely not getting into that because it's meant to be a one-off meeting. And I can't have you get into the worst of everything you've been through and then tell you, see you later. We're not doing this anymore.
Yeah, what a mess,
Um,
right? Let's
right.
let's unpack that closet and just leave it in the middle of the room and then just leave.
Exactly. Not enough time
Yeah,
to put Humpty Dumpty back together. But
yeah,
I think just check it out, whether through your agency or on your own, and do it before you need it because there may come a time in your career where you will need it. You might think that you are fine and one day realize you're not. And having a person on your team already is going to mitigate any disaster.
yeah. I love that, and I love the dentist example. Like I've always likened it to the doctor, right? But the dentist is a great example because unless you're going in for those just quick little check-ins, right? The quick cleanings where they just pop an X-ray. Like, how are you gonna know? You don't want to find out that you have, like a double impacted molar, and you're gonna need surgery. Once everything's infected, right, and extremely painful, and you're bedridden or a root canal, whatever, right? Like, you can see little clues or little signs, and I think that it's a very relevant comparison in that way. All right, Johanna. So we're going to wrap it up. And can you tell the listeners where they can find you?
Yes. So my website is bravuracounseling.com, and Bravura is Bravura counseling.com. I'm on Instagram at First Responder Counselor, and I kind of post a mix of personal and professional things there. And the reason I do that is I show people a little bit of what I do for my own self care, in addition to work related things, post traumatic stress related things. And so hopefully that's an interesting resource for anybody who follows me.
Yeah. Well, I do, and I appreciate. That's where I was saying, like, I know Johanna, but it is always impressive to see someone grinding away, and makes me a little bit more motivated when I share circles with other people that are driven to push themselves physically and mentally. So thank you so much. I'm gonna have that information in the show notes. Thanks for coming on with us today. Really appreciate it, and thank you for doing everything you do for our community.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Eric.
All right. Tune in next time for We'll Find Out.